The 2024 NBA Draft Combine is behind us, so let's dive into this week's standouts. This is Floor and Ceiling, let's break them down. It's natural to start with Bronny James, given that he absolutely dominated the headlines at the Draft Combine. The USC freshman had a very modest season. He averaged about 5 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists per game on 27% from 3. No doubt, those were underwhelming figures for Bronny, who was coming in as a 5-star prospect and McDonald's All-American out of Sierra Canyon, but some context, I think, is necessary. I'll have a longer video on James soon, but his season was obviously derailed to a big extent after his sudden cardiac arrest last July. And then, from an on-court perspective, things never really clicked with the Trojans as a whole. Bronny tested well at the Combine. He'll come in at a little under 6'3" in shoes, which was to be expected. And then his wingspan, which is slightly more than 6'7", is strong for his position. Bronny shot the 3-ball really well in drills, but despite this, or his poor percentage from 3 this season, I have long maintained that he can be a very good shooter down the line. The figures did not accompany him like they did in high school, but I think the versatility and the touch should be there. In the scrimmages, James had an up and down showing, but I thought he helped himself overall. His most significant improvement points remain similar. Bronny struggles to break down his defenders one-on-one, his handle still lacks shake, and he can find it difficult to create events on the floor rather than connect them. James can also stand to get better at the basket, given that he is genuinely a very good positional athlete, but he does not always get the most out of that. On the flip side, what I really liked from Bronny was his increased assertiveness, especially on day 2 when he had 13 points in 23 minutes. Bronny was pulling up off the bounce, making quick decisions, spraying the ball out as a passer, and playing with his typical defensive intensity. I understand that I'll be in the minority here, but I would still feel very comfortable drafting James in the first round and looking to develop him into a Davion Mitchell type 3-and-D guard. AJ Johnson only played about 200 league minutes in the Australian NBL, so he had a lot to prove coming into the Draft Combine. We've covered Johnson on Floor and Ceiling before. He was a very highly touted prospect out of high school, and it looked like he was going to go to Texas for college, but instead he joined the Illawarra Hawks in the NBL. The biggest issue with Johnson is honestly his body. Really, he's just a long ways away from being physically prepared for NBA action. This has been a big issue for him going back years, and I do find it somewhat concerning that this aspect is taking a fairly long time to develop. As a result, the concern, logically, for some NBA teams is that they'll draft Johnson, develop him, invest resources in him, but then it'll actually be the team on his second contract which winds up benefiting. Otherwise, I do think that there will be a significant amount of NBA scouts and decision makers out there who are pretty high on Johnson. AJ measured in well at about 6'6" in shoes with a wingspan over 6'8". The Illawarra prospect's appeal is that he is creative and explosive off the dribble, with very real potential to turn into a dangerous 3-level shot maker. Johnson is a highly explosive athlete, almost in the Jalen Green mold, but he really finds it hard to get to his spots despite his creative handle because of that lack of strength. In theory, AJ is probably not too far away from contributing strictly as a shot maker, so you could see him as either a 1 or a 2 guard. In reality though, he is probably at least 3 seasons away from giving a team real minutes, so I'm very interested in seeing where Johnson lands on draft night. Another playmaker prospect who went down under and also impressed at the Combine was Trentyn. Flowers really intrigues me because he's shown glimpses of handling, passing, shooting, and athleticism at around 6'8" with a multi-positional profile. Flowers didn't have a great season with the Adelaide 36ers in the NBL. However, I will say that the club faced a lot of turmoil and Flowers was actually pretty productive in games where he played over 15 minutes. The caveat here though is that sample size is tiny, and we should also remember that Flowers started this season as his team's point guard, but he was nowhere near ready to organize an offense in a pro league. The good news coming out of this week is that it seems like the 19-year-old has really become a much more willing off-the-ball player over the last year or so. In the combine, Flowers was at his best when he was cutting hard to the basket, using his athleticism in transition, and then leveraging that to open up the rest of his game. Looking ahead, his handle and his body will still need a lot of work. Flowers needs a screen basically every single time in order to create space, and even then, he doesn't look that comfortable. On top of that, he'll also need to prove that he's a reliable shooter on a higher volume, even if his flashes look good to me. So for now, I have an early second round grade on Flowers, but I would not be surprised at all to see a team gamble on him late in the first round. Nikola Djurisic out of Serbia raised a lot of interest headed into this week after a very strong end to his club season. Djurisic has been on draft radars for a while now, as we've seen on Floor and Ceiling, and he had his best year to date playing for Mega in the Adriatic League. At the start of the season, Djurisic was sharing the backcourt with projected top 10 pick Nikola Topic, but after Topic was recalled from his loan, Djurisic took on a much bigger role for Mega with some 20 plus and even 30 plus point performances. The main idea with Djurisic is that either at the 2 or the 3, he can bring size and athleticism to the table at 6'8", and then he can also use that to fuel his scoring instincts. Djurisic is 100% the type of player to prefer the ball in his hands. He can pass a little bit, but for me, the truth is that his decision making is super shaky. I'm also worried because historically, the percentages have never been there for him as a shooter, and this especially applies from 3. Defensively, I'm also not sure how or who Djurisic defends at the NBA level. Even right now, he really struggles on this end of the floor. And this last note is more of a two-way situation, but he is a good athlete, don't get me wrong. However, his first step and pop, I feel, should look a lot more neutered against NBA competition. At this stage, I'm still not very invested, and I would have Djurisic around the very end of the second round. Ulrich Chomche is the youngest prospect in this draft. The 6'11" forward out of Cameroon has spent the last few years at the African NBA Academy, and he will still be 18 years old until December 30th. I've had the chance to evaluate Chomche in person before, and I have to say that he definitely caught my attention. This was before we even knew that he was eligible for this draft, but he was bouncy and long with very real mobility. Even though I saw Chomche against a lower level of competition, he was switchable, disruptive in pick and rolls, and explosive, helping in the paint. On the other side of the floor, Chomche had a budding jumper, but he was most effective, in my opinion, using his athleticism to cut or dive hard to the rim and dunk the ball. However, in the short term, the most important thing to know about the NBA Academy prospect is that he remains incredibly green. Chomche does not have experience making high-level reads on either end, and it's very fair to question how many years away he is from helping an NBA team. At the same time, I think it's also worth looking at the other side of the coin. In this wide-open draft, you have a super young and moldable prospect who is athletic, long with a 7'4" wingspan, interesting on defense both at the rim and in space, and finally, projectable on offense in a safer catch-and-finish role, but I also think with the means in the future to branch out his game to the perimeter. Drafting Chomche in the second round with a very long-term outlook makes the most sense in my opinion, but there's certainly a world out there where a team talks themselves into a top 25 selection to avoid losing him.